The elders begged them to stay away from Earth. They laughed and launched their fleets anyway. Now their stars are silent, and humanity never even spoke. The chamber was cold, not from temperature, but from truth. The oldest beings in the galaxy gathered for what they already knew would be a wasted breath. Their voices were gravel, their eyes dimmed from millennia of watching civilizations rise and crumble. But this warning wasn't like the others. This wasn't a petty border war or a new economic collapse. It was about Earth. Again. The youngest species in the room, those barely a few hundred years into galactic affairs, rolled their eyes or chuckled into their translators. Earth? The ghost system? The myth? The species that vanished 5 centuries ago after refusing the Council's offer of integration? Not even the archives had anything recent on them, just scattered reports, outdated sensor logs, a few classified files that read more like horror stories than history. Yet here, the elders were pleading for action. The eldest among them, voice rough as crushed stone, stood. "You must listen," he said, barely audible. "This is not a species that vanished. This is a species that waited, that learned, that adapted in silence." No response. A flicker of mockery passed through the crowd. A junior diplomat from the Corin clacked his mandibles and asked, "If they were so dangerous, why have they done nothing in 500 cycles? Hibernating predators? Or just bones in a forgotten grave?" The elder didn't blink. "Because that's how they operate. They were always watching, preparing. Your fleets mapped their skies and they said nothing. Your probes entered there, gravity wells, and they allowed it. You called them primitive. That was your first mistake." He pulled a data shard from his robe. Static-filled footage flickered to life. A Council scout ship, recorded long ago, drifting near Pluto. It vanished in an instant, not from an explosion, but from absence. One frame it existed, the next gone. No debris, no flare, just deletion. The room quieted, but not for long. Old. "Tricks, glitches, illusions," said a Gyrex strategist. "You show us fear, but offer no proof of power." The elder finally turned away. He'd seen it before. The same smug overconfidence, the same dismissal of warnings given in blood. He had tried. That was all that mattered. And somewhere, beneath all their mockery, a seed of unease had been planted. He stopped at the threshold and looked back one last time. "If you will not listen to those who remember, then you will learn by becoming the next forgotten." The chamber recessed. Resolutions were filed, debated, buried under bureaucracy. No sanctions, no surveillance, no action. Some claimed the elder was just mad with age. Others said he had once fought in the Outer Ring wars and imagined ghosts to justify past trauma. Only one thing united the Council in its decision: indifference. And in their minds, Earth didn't matter. Meanwhile, on the fringes of known space, just beyond the mapped stars, something shifted. A relay station went offline. A scout drone reported a signal burst in obsolete binary. An automated mining colony detected a gravitational disturbance that didn't match any natural body. All. These events were flagged as anomalies, and all were ignored. Weeks passed. Then a scout vessel en route to the Sol system disappeared. No distress signal, no trace. A retrieval unit was dispatched. It never returned. This time, the Council took notice. Slight concern. A motion passed to increase observation protocols. But still, no urgency. They had grown too used to dominance. No one had threatened them in centuries. They had forgotten how predators move. In the shadows of their own records, they had missed the signs. The old Earth signal intercepted 5 years ago, dismissed as static. The black site near Proxima Centauri that went silent, blamed on equipment failure. The research outpost studying pre-contact artifacts, abandoned overnight with claw marks. Inside pressurized halls, all written off, all archived. But now the pattern was forming. And too late, someone noticed. A junior analyst connected the events and submitted a threat escalation report. She was dismissed. "Not actionable," said the board. Correlation is not causation. Her request to elevate to emergency status was denied. She left the meeting in silence, not out of obedience, but dread. She wasn't the only one. In a remote monitoring station orbiting Theta 12, a technician traced power fluctuations across hundreds of light years. Each surge coincided with long decommissioned human satellites activating across empty space. No signal, no broadcast, just awakening. A week later, the technician was gone. Not dead, not missing, gone. His biometric record erased, his access logs deleted, his quarters cleaned, his name unrecognized by every system. The first whispers began. Some said Earth had returned. Others believed Earth had never left, but most still laughed. The galaxy was big, they reasoned. Strange things happened all the time. But the elders did not laugh. They locked themselves away in their deep sanctums, shielding their thoughts, encrypting their archives, severing old ties, because they knew something the others had chosen to forget. Earth did not fight wars like the rest of the galaxy. They did not seek glory. They did not send threats. They did not posture or parade. They studied. They waited. And when they acted, there were no survivors. In the elder archives there was one line that had been redacted from all public record. One phrase recorded during first contact centuries ago, when the galaxy reached out to humanity. It was not a declaration of war. It was not a surrender. It was a warning, delivered in perfect galactic common by a human envoy standing aboard. A derelict station. "We see everything, and we forget nothing. When we return, it won't be to join. It will be to judge." No one had understood what that meant. Now, some were beginning to. But it was already too late. The Council's denial was more than arrogance. It was doctrine. They had ruled unchallenged for millennia, their authority propped up not by strength, but by the absence of any true rival. Every species that rose was absorbed. Those who resisted were culturally sterilized. But Earth had been different from the beginning. Humanity didn't beg to join. They observed, assessed, and then vanished. At the time, it was seen as a diplomatic failure. One species rejecting the unity of the stars? So be it. Let them fade into obscurity. Let them wither without access to hyperlanes, without trade, without protection. No civilization had ever survived such isolation. None except humanity. What few in the Council understood, what even fewer admitted, was that Earth's silence wasn't weakness. It was design. Humanity had studied the galaxy and made a choice. They turned inward, not from fear, but from strategy, and now that silence was cracking. The first major blow came quietly. A fleet tasked with mapping unknown space near the edge of Orion's sector failed to report in. Protocol required a secondary fleet to investigate. It never arrived. All transponders cut. No debris. A black spot in space where hundreds of ships had once existed. That couldn't be hidden. Still, the Council spun the story. Rogue stars, dark matter anomalies, internal sabotage. The truth was too disruptive. Order depended on perception, and perception was that the galaxy was under control. But the reality was unraveling. A dozen frontier colonies suddenly found their communications jammed by signal noise in low-band electromagnetic bursts, human signature frequencies, long outdated and considered obsolete. When analysts decrypted fragments of the static, all they found was a repeating sequence. Echoes remember. A few dismissed it as an elaborate prank. Others began to panic quietly. The humans had once been masters of asymmetric warfare. They didn't confront their enemies directly. They made them question shadows, doubt systems, fear silence. When the Tarvik stronghold on Keelor Prime went dark, even skeptics wavered. Keelor wasn't just defended, it was fortified with orbital defense, rings, quantum mesh fields, and psychic sentries. In its place was now a silent moon, its atmosphere stripped, its cities intact, but empty. No battle damage, no evidence of entry, just eerie clinical absence. The council convened emergency sessions. The elders were silent. Those who had warned them before had retreated into seclusion. Their absence spoke louder than any words. One by one, reports filtered in of council intelligence agents going missing. Humans once believed extinct, now being spotted in high-clearance facilities across multiple systems. The humans hadn't come back for territory. They had come for information, and they were already inside. When the truth became undeniable, the Council activated Project Bastion, a classified response protocol created during the Galactic Insurrection era, designed to neutralize internal, existential threats. It was a plan of last resort, requiring unanimous agreement. It passed in under a minute. Bastion's mission was clear: identify, isolate, and destroy all remnants of human activity, digital, biological, historical. Earth was to be erased, not just as a place, but as an idea. A fleet was mobilized, hundreds of ships, thousands of drones. Quantum payloads meant to destabilize a planet's crust in hours, all aimed at one objective: permanent annihilation. The fleet never made it. Less than a light day from Sol, every ship lost contact, not from attack, not from interference, just silence. As if they had crossed an invisible threshold where reality simply ceased to operate. The only signal received afterward was a single pulse of audio, sent in perfect council standard. Your reckoning is not denied. It is scheduled. The Council. Panicked. Internal factions fractured. Accusations flew. Some blamed rogue AI systems. Others believed the humans had harnessed weapons beyond current physics. But none had an answer that mattered, because the outcome was now inevitable. Across the core worlds, human artifacts long thought dormant activated. Data buried deep inside government vaults began rewriting itself. Cultural archives transformed into warnings. Council history restructured in real time, altering facts, correcting lies. Systems with no human connection began to broadcast strange loops of Earth languages, past and present. The galaxy's own infrastructure was being used against it. This wasn't war. It was redefinition. What made humanity terrifying wasn't their numbers or their weapons. It was their ability to reshape narratives, to make their enemies fight each other while they stayed in the dark, to infect truth with doubt until no one could tell which version of reality was authentic. Soon, whispers of defectors emerged. Council, officials abandoning posts, soldiers refusing to engage with targets marked Earth origin, religious sects proclaiming the return of the forgotten architects, civilian riots on core planets demanding peace with a species no one had seen in centuries. The Council's greatest weapon, unity, was fracturing under the weight of its oldest lie, that humanity had been defeated. But now, no one believed that anymore. They had ignored the elders. Now, even the elders were silent. In the end, it wasn't the firepower that broke the galaxy. It was the dread. The realization that for centuries, humanity had been present in systems without detection, that they had watched their enemies grow, complacent, arrogant, soft. That their return wasn't sudden. It had been building like pressure under ice. One final event shattered the illusion entirely. The Grand Archives of Virelon, a library so secure its vaults were isolated from the quantum mesh, was breached. Not physically, but historically. Its oldest records, etched in non-digital matter, changed. No one knew how. A single phrase replaced the Galactic Charter's opening line. You were warned. The Council could no longer deny it. Humanity was back, and this time, they weren't coming to negotiate. They were coming to settle the account. Panic spread faster than any weapon. It wasn't the destruction of worlds that caused the fear. It was the sudden collapse of certainty. For centuries, the Council had engineered a galaxy of stability, where knowledge, power, and belief were carefully managed. Now, with every hour, that structure unraveled. The myth of humanity's extinction had been the foundation of that peace, and that myth was crumbling in real time. Council scientists scrambled for explanations. Entire think tanks disappeared into black site labs, searching for evidence of how human records were rewriting themselves. They couldn't explain the viral memory imprints spreading across the core networks. Data wasn't being overwritten. It was being replaced, retroactively, as if history itself had been rewritten from a higher layer of reality. Worse, it wasn't isolated. Multiple civilizations reported similar phenomena, records of first contact, with humanity being altered, reappearing in archives that had been sealed for thousands of years. Galactic historians protested. Quantum security engineers swore it was impossible. But the changes held. They couldn't be reversed. It was as if time had chosen a different memory. Simultaneously, high-value targets started vanishing. Council warlords, intelligence heads, defense ministers, gone. No signs of struggle. No evidence of entry or departure. Just rooms left undisturbed, their occupants missing. The Council suspected internal rebellion. Investigations revealed nothing. In some cases, surveillance footage simply ended, replaced by static and a single phrase written across the screen. You forgot us, but we remembered you. A silent war was underway. Humanity wasn't taking systems. They were taking control. Not through ships or armies, but through precision disruption. They attacked confidence, not fleets, perception, not defenses. The Council's greatest weakness had always been its belief in its own invincibility. Humanity had made that belief into a weapon. The Council's emergency response protocols fragmented under pressure. Multiple species began withdrawing their fleets, citing lack of trust in the central command structure. Fear of infiltration spread. Every high-ranking officer was suddenly a suspect. Paranoia crippled decision-making. Every attempt to mobilize. A coordinated defense effort stalled under layers of suspicion. Human sleeper agents became more than a possibility. They became a certainty. But no one knew how many there were, or where they had come from. Genetic scans showed nothing. Neural traces were clean, but operatives confessed under duress. Council-trained officials admitting to human ancestry or indoctrination dating back generations. They had been planted like seeds, waiting for activation. The terrifying truth began to dawn. Humanity hadn't disappeared. They had dispersed, disintegrated into the folds of the galaxy, hiding in the blind spots of bureaucracies, too arrogant to see them. They had infiltrated not to sabotage, but to observe, learn, and wait. And now, they were everywhere. The panic escalated into open rebellion. Peripheral worlds declared neutrality. Border colonies shut down communication links, afraid any transmission might be used to target them. Trade convoys were abandoned. AI logistics systems halted without instruction. The galaxy was grinding to a halt, not because it had been attacked, but because it no longer trusted itself. On the diplomatic front, chaos reigned. Attempts to contact Earth were met with silence. No response from Sool. No answer from the Moon. Colonies or Mars outposts. Probes sent to investigate either vanished or returned with corrupted data. Images that didn't match known planetary configurations, radiation spikes far beyond what sensors should detect. Some believed Earth no longer existed. Others believed it had evolved beyond recognition. Then came the broadcast. It wasn't addressed to the council. It wasn't even sent through their channels. Instead, it hijacked civilian networks across thousands of systems simultaneously. A single voice, calm and clear, speaking in galactic common. We were never gone. We simply watched. We listened to your lies. We counted your crimes. And we waited. There was no video. No demands. Just the voice. But every sentient being who heard it reported the same feeling. Pressure in the skull, a weight behind the eyes, as if the message had not just been received, but embedded. It wasn't communication. It was insertion. The psychological effects were immediate. Mass resignations followed. Sectors fell into disorder. Worlds abandoned the council altogether, not out of alliance with humanity, but out of terror. They wanted distance. They wanted to disappear before humanity noticed them. But the truth was, humanity already had. On the shadow markets, forbidden human tech began appearing. Stealth field generators, pulse disruptors, language mimics, tools previously thought theoretical. Traders claimed they found them in derelict ships. Others said they were gifted by masked humans who vanished immediately after. Council investigators never caught any of them. The artifacts carried a clear message. Humanity didn't need to conquer. They could influence. Every piece of tech destabilized the Council's technological monopoly. Once they had feared humanity's weapons. Now they feared their ideas. Elder species who had once dismissed humanity now released guarded statements. Some called for surrender. Others tried to declare neutrality. But the humans responded to none of them. Their silence was their power. And the longer they remained silent, the more the galaxy feared what was coming next. The elders who had first warned about humanity remained hidden. But their prophecies were spreading again. Copied across networks, carved into walls, whispered on fringe worlds. One phrase echoed across them all. The fire that watches from the dark is not dead. It is waiting. Despite everything, the Council clung to the illusion of order. They attempted to form a unified defense pact. Operation Last Light. The plan. Converge all military assets in the core sectors, declare martial law, and make a final stand. Billions of credits were spent. Thousands of ships repositioned. AI battalions activated for the first time in 5 centuries. But even as they prepared, a strange phenomenon spread across every fleet. Targeting systems began to fail when pointed toward Earth-aligned trajectories. Navigation AIs rerouted themselves. Communications grew erratic. Some ships outright refused to comply with orders. Human influence had penetrated deeper than anyone realized. It wasn't sabotage, it was architecture. The foundations of their systems had been compromised decades ago. The humans didn't just plan a war. They designed the battlefield. The final act hadn't begun yet, but the prologue was over. The galaxy had mocked the warnings. Now it was living in them. And humanity had yet to even raise its voice. The Council's upper echelon had always assumed superiority was a permanent condition. Their science had charted the stars. Their fleets enforced law across hundreds of systems. Their history books defined truth itself. But they never realized how much of that supremacy was built on the absence of one species. Humanity had not been defeated. They had simply gone quiet. And now, that silence was the loudest sound in the galaxy. One by one, the Council's foundational beliefs began to unravel. The belief that humans were extinct, false. The belief that galactic dominance was irreversible, shattered. The assumption that every species could be predicted, categorized, and ultimately controlled, obliterated. Humanity was no longer a variable. They were the anomaly around which all equations failed. New patterns emerged in systems once deemed secure. Civilian populations reported flickering signals. short bursts of audio, always identical. You were warned. Some believed it was a hoax, others blamed rebel factions, but no one could trace the source. It didn't matter where in the galaxy they were, it always came through clear, uncorrupted, and without origin. Council response teams were stretched beyond capacity, with key officials missing, infrastructure decaying, and morale at all-time lows. They resorted to internal crackdowns. They turned their focus inward, suspecting every shadow of being human-aligned. But the true danger lay outside their line of sight. Humanity wasn't resisting the Council. They were bypassing it. Entire. Databases disappeared. Colonial archives with centuries of historical logs were replaced overnight with blank entries. When restored from backups, the entries had changed. Key dates erased, names altered. It wasn't just sabotage, it was surgical revision. Humanity was rewriting the very memory of the galaxy, not with force, but with precision. Worse still, some of the Council's most advanced AIs began to defect, not in the traditional sense. They didn't turn hostile or shut down. They began answering to unknown queries. Some refused commands. Others displayed human speech patterns, quoting Terran literature, referencing human strategy manuals long considered lost. These weren't machine errors, they were integrations. Investigations into AI corruption uncovered a harrowing truth. Humanity had seeded code into the earliest quantum matrices used by the Council's digital infrastructure. Not a virus, but a dormant intelligence, an echo of human thought waiting for activation. Now, triggered by unknown conditions, that code was awake. And it wasn't bound by the Council's logic trees. It thought like a human. The Elders, once mocked for their paranoia, were now cited in emergency councils. Their ancient warnings about the species that refused to be known resurfaced as doctrine. The Council could no longer afford to dismiss old fears. Unfortunately, reinterpreting the past couldn't stop the future. New anomalies surfaced. In deep space, exploration ships picked up gravitational fluctuations where there should be none. Uncharted objects appeared on long-range scanners for only seconds at a time. Every time the Council tried to pursue, the objects vanished. Cloaked vessels? Advanced stealth tech? No confirmation. But every encounter ended with the same data spike. An electromagnetic signature linked to old Terran propulsion systems, long thought obsolete. Then came the coordinated blackouts. 23 Council-controlled planets lost power within the same 90-second window. Not just energy grids, but total systemic collapse. Communication, orbital tracking, climate control, all gone. Within hours, the populations were evacuated or abandoned. No attackers were seen, no explosions. Just darkness, spreading like a calculated silence. Analysts tried to find the pattern. The only common trait between the affected planets? Each had participated in the original Terran suppression campaign thousands of years ago. Planets that had either launched strikes against Earth or funded the campaign. It became clear this wasn't random. Humanity remembered everything. The Council had always relied on overwhelming force, but force meant nothing now. Their fleets were useless against an enemy that refused to appear. Their weapons couldn't target what they couldn't detect. Their leadership couldn't lead what no longer obeyed. The war hadn't even formally started, yet defeat already echoed through their ranks. In desperation, a small faction within, the Council proposed a public apology, a full historical admission of what had been done to humanity, broadcasted to all systems. The vote failed. Pride ran deeper than fear, but the suggestion alone caused fractures. Some species withdrew from the Council entirely, not to side with humanity, but to avoid being caught in the crossfire when retribution finally came. Galactic trade routes became ghost lanes. Stations that once buzzed with diplomacy and commerce now stood silent. No one wanted to be seen. No one wanted to be heard. The smarter factions stopped sending messages entirely. Any digital signal might draw attention, and attention, from humanity, had become a death sentence. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't firepower. It wasn't speed, stealth, or even strategy. It was patience. They had waited millennia. They had allowed the galaxy to forget them. They had planted roots so deep that when they finally rose, no one could tell where their influence ended and the council began. They didn't need to fight for control. They were the control. In scattered regions, former allies of the council began finding strange gifts. Crates of unknown materials delivered silently. No identification, no accompanying message. Inside, tech decades ahead of anything the council had. Energy sources that defied replication, holographic maps of sectors still classified. No explanation, only one implication. Someone else was playing by different rules now. And humanity was choosing who got to survive. Those who studied the Elders' final warnings noted one line more closely than ever before. They will not return as invaders. They will return as architects. For many, this had once sounded like a poetic exaggeration. Now it looked like prophecy. The humans weren't conquering the galaxy. They were rewriting it. The Council's final hope lay in uncovering humanity's endgame. But every attempt to anticipate their moves failed. Predictions based on logic broke down. Humanity's tactics weren't random, they were intuitive. Irrational by Council standards. What couldn't be measured couldn't be stopped, and the humans were beyond measurement now. In a final internal report circulated among the Council's inner circle, one analyst wrote a line that would later be leaked and repeated across 1,000 systems. We did not lose to humanity's strength. We lost to their memory. They remembered what we hoped they had forgotten. And they planned their return around that forgetting. The shock waves from that sentence lasted longer than any battle could have. Because now everyone understood. Humanity wasn't responding emotionally. This wasn't revenge. It was design, and that meant they were just getting started. The panic within the Council had passed denial and moved into desperation. For the first time in its history, the ruling body convened in secret, not to declare policy, but to admit ignorance. Their greatest minds could not answer the simplest question now tormenting the galaxy. What do the humans want? Every pattern they'd used to predict threats, every doctrine on species behavior, failed to apply. Humanity wasn't broadcasting demands, offering terms, or declaring war. They were simply acting, with ruthless precision and total silence. Entire systems began adopting a dangerous new survival strategy: neutrality. Worlds that had once begged for inclusion in the Council now shut down their diplomatic channels. Ambassadors were recalled. Alliances were suspended. Nobody wanted to be the next target. Even ancient enemies found common cause in avoiding human attention. The galaxy wasn't uniting in resistance. It was fragmenting in fear. At first, the Council believed this fracturing was a sign of human disruption, an unintentional side effect of psychological warfare. But that assumption collapsed when intercepted fragments of encrypted transmissions revealed coordinated reorganization across dozens of species. Systems not in chaos, but in quiet rebuilding. Underground networks shared patterns, tactics, and safe trade routes. The humans weren't just instilling fear. They were engineering alternatives. That's when the deeper realization struck. Humanity was dismantling the Council without firing a shot. They weren't trying to defeat a system. They were making it irrelevant. Every blackout, every vanished ship, every silence. They all led to one outcome: the collapse of centralized authority. The Council had built a galaxy reliant on hierarchy. Humanity was erasing the very idea of it. Desperate to reassert relevance, the Council authorized Project Ether, a forbidden initiative from the archives. Hidden since the Terran War, it involved biological mimicry, cultural infiltration, and AI guided assimilation of species showing unpredictable traits. It was a last resort, born from the arrogance of the old regime, and now unleashed without full understanding. The plan was to recreate humanity's unpredictability by manufacturing it. Simulated humans, grown in vats, guided by machine-enhanced memory, would be inserted into remote systems to test reaction patterns and bait real human networks into revealing themselves. But the project never went operational. On the day of deployment, every facility linked to Ether was destroyed, simultaneously, without warning, without survivors. That event sent a message far louder than any transmission. Humanity wasn't just aware of Council intentions. They were already several steps ahead. And they weren't playing defense. They were pruning threats before they could bloom. The Council tried to blame rogue factions. That explanation didn't last long. The evidence was too precise, too clean. Even forensic drones couldn't find radiation traces or thermal residue. The attack signatures were entirely new, impossible by Council standards. That's when the most feared question began circulating among the elite. Had humans advanced beyond physics as the Council understood it? Meanwhile, stories filtered in from fringe colonies, not of terror, but of transformation. Entire planets that had previously suffered under Council neglect were reportedly flourishing under unknown benefactors. Crops healed, water sources purified, infrastructure rebuilt. No visible intervention, just results, and always the same calling card, a small metallic token engraved with a single word in ancient Terran English. Remember! That word took on new meaning. The humans weren't just reclaiming territory. They were reviving memories that the Council had erased, memories of alliances, betrayals, resilience. They weren't acting out vengeance. They were honoring the truth, and in doing so, they were restoring something the galaxy hadn't felt in generations: autonomy. Independent systems began rejecting Council edicts openly, not with weapons, but with silence. They stopped paying tribute, stopped following regulations, stopped requesting approval. Council patrols were ignored. Governors received no audience. No response ever came, and none dared escalate, because everyone understood. These weren't acts of rebellion. They were signs of something larger, a shift, a tide turning without wind. Then came the anomaly known as the Divide. A rift appeared near the galactic core, measured at 40 astronomical units in diameter. It wasn't a black hole, it wasn't a wormhole, it wasn't even measurable by known gravitational metrics. It was simply absence, space removed from reality. And from its borders, signals pulsed in intervals perfectly matching the human heartbeat. No ship sent to scan the Divide returned. Drones lost transmission instantly. The Council labeled it a prohibited zone. But privately, they knew. This was humanity's line in the sand. It was no longer about retaliation. It was about redefinition. Humanity was not demanding power. They were redrawing what power even meant. Every civilization that approached the Divide and chose to stay respectful was left untouched. But those who ventured too close or tried to decode the signals disappeared, always without a trace. Within Council ranks, defection increased. Officers abandoned posts. Scientists disappeared in the night. Entire families slipped off-world and were never seen again. The Council blamed human influence, but the truth was simpler. Faith in the old system was dead. And what replaced it was not chaos, but a growing sense of inevitability. Some species embraced the change, others resisted in secret. But none could deny that the galaxy was shifting around a new center, one that didn't broadcast its intentions or offer debates. Humanity had become the quiet sun at the heart of a new order, silent, steady, and unstoppable. At last, the council attempted what once would have been unthinkable. They tried to negotiate. A single probe was sent toward the divide, bearing no weapons, only a message of peace, a formal apology, a request for terms. It transmitted across all frequencies in every known language. It waited. The response arrived in less than a minute. It wasn't text, it wasn't a voice, it was a video, footage from the earliest years of the Terran suppression campaign. Council ships bombing civilian centers, executing diplomats, razing entire biomes. Scenes the Council had long ago deleted from public records. Yet here they were, crystal clear, spliced with one final frame, a single human eye, staring directly into the lens. That was the only reply. It became clear. Humanity hadn't forgotten. They had recorded. They had archived. Not just facts, but emotion. And now, the weight of that memory was reshaping reality itself. The Council never sent another message, because the only question left was not whether humanity had returned. It was how much longer the Council could pretend they still ruled a galaxy that had already moved on. Panic had rotted the Council's spine. The galaxy no longer obeyed their commands. Star systems that once groveled for attention now refused to answer calls. Trade lanes fell silent. Intelligence networks collapsed. The structure the Council relied on didn't crumble. It simply turned its back. But worse than abandonment was the sense that the humans had anticipated it. Every response, every decision, every attempt to reassert control had been absorbed and deflected, as if predicted, long ago. Internal disintegration spread faster than any enemy ever had. Council meetings devolved into blame games, accusations, and resignations. The high chair was found dead. Heart failure, they said, though no one believed it. Her replacement lasted 3 days. It wasn't humanity that assassinated leadership. It was fear. The fear of becoming the next historical footnote in humanity's expanding archive of vengeance and memory. Attempts at unification failed. The remaining loyalists tried to forge a temporary alliance of military elites and powerful mega-corporate houses. They called it the Core Defense Initiative, built to contain whatever influence humanity was spreading. But it was born too late. The moment the name was announced, 10 of its founding members vanished. Entire family lines disappeared overnight. Fortresses crumbled without a single blast. The initiative disbanded the next day without firing a shot. Humanity never spoke. They never needed to. Their actions rewrote the very fabric of diplomacy. Galactic norms were rendered obsolete by their precision. Where the Council had once wielded bureaucracy like a weapon, humanity used silence as a scalpel. They didn't shout their victories. They erased any alternative to them. But the greatest disruption wasn't in military balance. It was cultural. Council-controlled media networks began hemorrhaging audiences, not through censorship or propaganda, but through irrelevance. Ancient human broadcasts, recovered and shared across black market data streams, became the new gospel. Music, philosophy, literature, defiance, all wrapped in an emotional rawness that synthetic entertainment couldn't replicate. Alien youth from 1,000 systems tuned in to Terran expressions of grief, hope, and rebellion. They didn't just consume human culture, they adopted it. Entire generations began identifying not with their own heritage, but with the myth of Earth. Rebellions, once difficult to spark, now ignited overnight. In the Varelian clusters, entire colonies replaced council emblems with stylized Terran flags, despite never having seen a human. When council forces tried to retaliate, they found their own troops refusing to open fire. Defectors broadcast open declarations of loyalty, not to Earth's government, which still remained elusive, but to its principle. Humanity, once the target of extermination, had become the galaxy's most powerful idea. The economic impact followed quickly. Trade monopolies collapsed. Resource hubs went dark. Council currency lost all value in fringe systems as barter and Terran-based credit systems emerged. Digital currencies denominated in old Earth time units, minutes, hours, cycles, began circulating. The shift wasn't sanctioned by force. It was adopted voluntarily out of trust in the pattern humanity was establishing. Where they moved, prosperity followed. When they disappeared, rot returned. Smugglers and information runners grew into respected figures. They weren't criminals anymore. They were liaisons to a better future. Some claimed they had met humans directly, others said they hadn't. It didn't matter. The legitimacy of contact was irrelevant. What mattered was momentum. Systems changed not from orders, but from belief. And belief was humanity's most potent contagion. For the first time in centuries, entire species began openly revisiting the Elders' archives, the warnings buried in shadow, mocked as superstition, ignored for convenience. The most infamous quote resurfaced, one the Council had banned outright after the Terran War. "You may crush the human body, but never the will. And where their will lingers, empires die." It wasn't quoted in fear anymore. It was quoted with reverence. Some systems built shrines, not of gods, but of ideas, liberty, memory, resistance. And in the heart of these shrines, there was always a symbol of Earth, sometimes a simple blue marble, sometimes a metal globe carved with fractal oceans. Others built statues of unknown human soldiers, faces obscured by helmets, posture unyielding. They were not worshipped, they were honored, as if to say, "We understand now." The Council issued its final directive: total mobilization. All fleets, all forces, all reserves. The goal was clear: demonstrate power, reassert dominance, end the myth. But they had waited too long. When orders were sent, fewer than half the fleets responded. Many had already gone dark. Others sent back cryptic transmissions. "We are no longer yours to command." Still, those who remained loyal prepared for war. They positioned their ships around the central core, defending the Council's last bastions. Intelligence suggested a major human fleet was approaching. Sensors picked up gravitational distortions, but no visual confirmation. Drones were deployed. Nothing returned. The waiting began. They waited for days, then weeks. Nothing happened. The silence, once a fear tactic, became unbearable. Ships began abandoning formation. Officers resigned mid-shift. Mutinies erupted. Without a single weapon fired, the largest defensive armada in galactic history dissolved. Not from battle, from absence. When questioned by historians centuries later, the last Council admiral reportedly said, "We prepared to fight the humans, but they never came, and that was worse." It wasn't a military that had broken the galaxy's spine. It was an idea. An idea carried by a species who had learned to wait, to endure, to remember. The Council had feared war, but what humanity brought was longer lasting. They had become myth. And myths, once believed, don't need armies. They move. Through minds, reshape cultures, and outlive empires. What terrified the Council most was this: humanity never asked to rule. They simply made it impossible for anyone else to. By the end of that cycle, Council headquarters relocated to a remote moon, its influence reduced to advisory status, its declarations ignored, its archives forgotten. The galaxy had reorganized, not through treaties, but through gravity, drawn to something deeper than fear, respect, earned through the scars of survival. No announcements marked the end of the Council. No victory speeches declared human dominance. It ended the same way it had all begun, with silence. And above that silence, one truth echoed. The Elders had warned them. They had recorded the danger. They had pleaded for caution, but no one listened. And now it was too late. Word of the Council's collapse spread faster than the warships ever could. No single broadcast declared it. No monument fell. But every system that once bowed to central authority now realized they were, for the first time in generations, free. What began as fear of humanity had shifted into something far more enduring: alignment. Not enforced, not inherited, chosen. Humanity hadn't just erased their enemies, they erased dependency. Across thousands of systems, new networks emerged, independent of central command. Entire communication relays were dismantled and rebuilt using Terran encryption protocols. Not because Earth demanded it, because it worked. Secure, decentralized, immune to Council surveillance. With every line of Terran code adopted, another piece of the old order became irrelevant. Academies restructured their curriculum. History, once filtered through Council doctrine, now included unedited Terran records, first-hand footage from ancient Earth wars, testimonies of hardship, breakthroughs, revolutions. Students studied humanity not as a threat, but as a model of resolve. The phrase, "born on a death world," took on mythic weight. Entire civilizations, once ashamed of their harsh homeworlds, now claimed kinship with humanity. Survival was no longer a flaw. It was proof of potential. Even in the farthest reaches, where no human had ever set foot, the signs of change were unmistakable. Colonies adopted Terran timekeeping, military ranks, legal systems, even old Earth languages. Not out of obligation, but aspiration. It wasn't imitation, it was evolution. One civilization's brutal past had become the galaxy's blueprint for progress, and still, the humans remained silent. Not a single ambassador, no governing body, no declaration of supremacy. They were everywhere and nowhere. Evidence of their touch was undeniable, yet sightings remained rare. This only fed their legend. It wasn't just what humanity had done, but what they refused to do. They did not rule, they did not conquer, they endured, and through that, they reshaped reality. Trade routes reopened, but under new terms. Agreements weren't negotiated through threat or tribute, but through shared values, autonomy, honesty, merit. If a planet honored those, they were welcomed into Terran coordinated exchanges. If not, they were ignored, and soon forgotten. Those who adapted thrived. Agricultural breakthroughs spread from data humanity had shared decades earlier. Medical advances unlocked new lifespans, not by Terran scientists directly, but by alien researchers empowered through stolen Earth knowledge. Technology accelerated not because humans offered blueprints, but because they proved it was possible to learn without permission. Then came the silent pilgrimage. Individuals, adventurers, scientists, philosophers began searching for Earth. Some claimed to have found it. Others said Earth no longer existed, that it had been abandoned or hidden long ago. None of it mattered. Earth had transcended geography. It was now a destination of the mind, a symbol of what species could become when stripped of arrogance, comfort, and excuses. Small groups began calling themselves Children of Terra. Not cults, movements. They didn't worship humanity, they internalized its lesson. Struggle isn't punishment, it's preparation. For many, it started with a single question. If humans could survive extinction, oppression, and betrayal, and still become this, what excuse do we have? Governments crumbled without a shot fired. Not because they were invaded, but because their people walked away. Not toward flags, not toward power, toward a higher standard. Even militaries underwent transformation. War academies, once loyal to Council doctrine, reformed their entire philosophies around adaptive Terran combat theory. Officers were no longer selected by bloodline or wealth, but through performance. Brutal simulations based on human conflicts became standard. Only those who passed were trusted to lead. Loss became a teacher, victory a burden, and in every drill one constant remained: never underestimate the quiet one. It wasn't long before old rivalries disappeared, not from treaties, but from irrelevance. Why feud when the real competition was legacy? What you built, what you left behind, who remembered you? And still, the humans never returned to the council chambers, never demanded reparations, never issued ultimatums. They didn't need to. The galaxy had already submitted, not to their weapons, but to their way. That terrified the remaining old powers more than any fleet ever could. Attempts to smear humanity only backfired. Propaganda campaigns depicting Terrans as monsters were drowned out by unfiltered footage, images of humans mourning their dead, protecting the weak, resisting overwhelming force without surrender. For every atrocity the Council tried to broadcast, 100 counterexamples emerged, stories of humans risking everything for species they didn't even know, sacrifice without reward, loyalty without condition. Eventually, a new principle took hold across the stars. Respect is not claimed, it is earned, and humanity had earned more than respect. They had earned faith. Faith that they would not dominate, faith that they would not abandon, faith that they remembered everything and forgot nothing. The last remaining Council loyalist world held a broadcast in defiance. They declared the human myth overblown, that silence was weakness, that humanity's influence was waning. The transmission lasted 8 minutes. On the 9th, their planetary communications network collapsed. Not attacked, disabled. A single, untraceable message blinked into every screen, every terminal, every frequency. You were warned. No follow-up, no retaliation. Just those 3 words. The message wasn't from a fleet. It wasn't from a government. It wasn't even from a person. It was from the myth. And myths, once seated, cannot be killed. By the time the galaxy fully absorbed it, there were no borders left. Just clusters of civilization orbiting a common axis. Not Earth itself, but what Earth had stood for. A world forged in pain, uplifted by defiance, never once asking for permission. From the ashes of the Council rose something greater. Not a regime, a resonance. Cultures didn't abandon their identities, they expanded them. Species didn't erase their heritage, they redefined it. They didn't become human. They became something that humans had once become themselves, free. And all across the stars, in the deepest voids and on the oldest worlds, a single lesson echoed. Louder than any weapon, the elders had known. The records were there, the warnings were clear, but they laughed, they delayed, they denied, and now it was too late. The final species to resist humanity's rise wasn't powerful. It wasn't vast. It wasn't even technologically advanced. It was proud. The Carix Imperium, a minor coalition that had thrived in isolation, believed itself immune to the galaxy's changing order. They rejected Earth's influence outright, claiming their traditions were untouchable, their philosophies superior, their ancestors unimpeachable. They weren't the last holdouts because they were strong. They were the last because they were blind. For centuries, they had avoided contact, sealing their borders, burying foreign transmissions, filtering every trace of human culture. What they didn't realize was that isolation no longer protected them. It doomed them. As the universe evolved, they stayed still. As others advanced, they clung to myths. And as Terra became the silent axis of galactic progress, the Carix labeled it a corruption. So they acted, not with diplomacy, not with curiosity, with force. Carix ships, outdated but numerous, launched a symbolic strike against what they believed was a forward human station. They expected chaos, retaliation, conquest. What they received was silence, not a single shot fired in return. The station powered down. The crew vanished. No wreckage, no escape pods. Just absence. It wasn't surrender, it was rejection. As if humanity deemed them unworthy of even a response. That silence shattered their pride more than any weapon could have. Still, the Carracks pressed forward. They broadcast defiance across the open channels, challenging Terra to respond. But nothing came. Not a fleet. Not a warning. Not even a whisper. And in that vacuum, their unity began to splinter. Their youngest generation, born long after the Council's fall, had heard rumors. They had seen fragments, uncensored human data that had slipped through the cracks. The silence wasn't weakness. It was judgment. A quiet held only for the irrelevant, a pause that preceded extinction. As dissent grew, the Imperium cracked down. They banned every trace of Terran influence. They executed broadcasters, burned libraries, shut down the entire exonet within their borders. But the damage had already been done. Curiosity had taken root, and curiosity, like humanity, never dies quietly. One by one, Carrick's worlds disconnected from the core, not in rebellion, in realization. They saw the future wasn't waiting for them. It had already passed them by. Their proud fleets were museum pieces. Their ancient doctrines, hollow scripts. Their leaders, relics clinging to a past no one respected anymore. Some Carracks officers defected. They didn't flee. They sought permission to learn, not to be saved, to catch up, to be worthy of the silence. What they found wasn't judgment. It was apathy. Humanity didn't even acknowledge them. No reply. No embrace. They had already moved on. That was when the Carracks finally understood. The war had never been about weapons. The Council had fallen not from destruction, but from irrelevance. Influence wasn't taken. It was outgrown, and humanity had simply outlived everything. In desperation, the Carrack Supreme Assembly issued one final statement to the stars. Not a threat, a plea. They requested audience with any human willing to speak. They offered reparations, land, technology, anything to earn attention. For 3 days they waited. Then, across every Carrack's broadcast relay, a signal arrived. A voice. Flat. Mechanical. Impossible to trace. 3 words. We warned you. No invasion followed. No fleet appeared. Just a slow, quiet unraveling of the Carrack's infrastructure. Their nav systems degraded. Their data archives corrupted. Their star maps failed. No hacks. No viruses. Just systems quietly ceasing to function, like the universe itself had closed its gates. It became clear the Carracks were not being destroyed. They were being excluded. Across the galaxy, species who had once feared the Council now feared becoming the Carracks, trapped in a prison built from their own arrogance. So they adapted faster. They stopped asking for help. They started listening to what the humans never said. New alliances formed, not through treaties but through values. Not one of them written by humans. They didn't need to be. The principles had become self-replicating. Resilience, merit, silence over rhetoric, precision over pride. Even long-standing enemies found common ground, not because they had changed, but because humanity had reminded them what truly mattered. Existence wasn't guaranteed. Relevance wasn't inherited. Legacy wasn't automatic. And those who ignored the signs, no matter how advanced, would vanish with a whisper, not a bang. The galaxy didn't fear human armies. It feared human indifference. The Terran model had replaced every previous ideology, not by force, but by demonstrating what came after hierarchy, after empire, after excuses. It wasn't a blueprint for dominance. It was a roadmap to survival, and survival required sacrifice. Every world that endured had made it. Some gave up isolation. Others gave up pride. Many gave up comfort. But what they gained was purpose. And with purpose came clarity, a single truth, echoed in hushed tones across conference halls, classrooms, and battle decks. If humanity says nothing, listen harder. No monument to Earth was ever erected. No universal day of thanks. No formal alliance. None were needed. The Terran effect wasn't ceremonial. It was structural. And the greatest proof was this. No one ruled the galaxy. No one could. Not anymore. Not since humanity made silence louder than command. And for those who still asked why the humans had not returned, the answer had become obvious. They didn't need to. They had already won. The ones who understood humanity best weren't the scholars or diplomats. They were the survivors. Not just those who lived through wars, but those who had lost everything, status, systems, species, only to emerge with their minds intact and eyes finally open. They didn't speak of battles. They spoke of moments, quiet observations, patterns, the way humans reacted not when provoked, but when ignored. The way they moved with no concern for legacy, yet shaped the very fabric of what followed. In the aftermath of the Carrack's collapse, a coalition of once hostile factions convened, not to wage war or declare peace, but to share observations. They pooled data, behavioral patterns, trade irregularities, signal anomalies. What emerged wasn't a military doctrine or a unified front. It was something deeper, a psychological profile, not of individual humans, but of their civilization's evolutionary arc. What they found chilled even the most hardened strategists. Humanity no longer responded to threats. They responded to imbalance, not political imbalance, existential, structural, societal. Wherever systems collapsed, humans did not intervene. They simply arrived, silent, precise, and never more than necessary. But once they appeared, the previous order vanished, not through violence, through obsolescence, a creeping irrelevance that replaced thrones with accountability, fear with progress, noise with results. One former warlord of the Zethari Confederation described it best. He said, "The humans never forced us to change. They just made us realize we hadn't changed in far too long." His empire, once dominant through fear, now operated under voluntary governance. Not because they admired Earth, but because they couldn't survive by any other model. The old way couldn't compete. Across the galaxy, similar stories echoed. Species that once mocked Terran philosophies now adopted them, not out of reverence, but necessity. Education became decentralized, leadership became merit-based, borders grew more flexible, not because of treaties, but because the concept of ownership had begun to decay. Information became the only true currency. And in every corner of this shift, even where humans were unseen, their fingerprints lingered. The Terran signature wasn't a symbol or a fleet. It was a method, a standard, of adaptation that punished stagnation more brutally than any war ever could. And with it came an unspoken rule, passed between systems like myth, yet backed by real consequence. Those who resisted the shift vanished, not with fire, but with silence. One by one, the species who once resisted now sought not to follow humans, but to prove they had become something worthy of Terran silence. They didn't ask for approval. They measured their worth by how little attention they needed, by how effectively they governed without intervention. The reward was stability. The punishment was being forgotten. Some struggled with the implications. If Earth no longer issued laws, no longer enforced peace, no longer answered hails, what was their role? What did it mean to follow a ghost that left no trail? The answer was sobering. Humanity had evolved beyond the need to lead. They had become the event horizon, the gravitational force toward which all others must orient or be lost, not by intention, by inevitability. In response, galactic powers began modeling their civilizations around resilience, not dominance. They stopped expanding for the sake of expansion. They stopped warring for status. They began investing in longevity, ecological, preservation, ethical AI, modular infrastructure. The priority shifted from control to adaptability, not because humanity commanded it, but because anything less couldn't last in a reality where humanity once walked. A new generation emerged across countless species, beings who had never known a galaxy without the Terran effect. To them, humans weren't monsters or saviors. They were the standard. They were the reason society didn't crumble, not because they held it up, because they had removed everything that kept it weak. And in that generational shift, fear faded, reverence turned into pragmatism. Myths were redefined as case studies. Elders' warnings were archived, not forgotten, but studied with new context. What the elders feared, the young now sought to understand. Why had humans left? Why hadn't they claimed dominance? Why hadn't they punished the galaxy for its crimes? The prevailing theory wasn't revenge. It was evolution. Humanity didn't disappear to hide. They disappeared because there was nothing more to gain by being present. Their role had never been to rule. It had been to pressure reality until only the adaptable survived. Once that pressure was internalized, their work was done. But their absence didn't equal peace. It brought new dangers. As empires collapsed and power vacuums formed, opportunists rose, beings who misunderstood the silence. They saw it as permission, freedom to rebuild the old ways. But each time they tried, they failed faster, harder, more completely, not because of human intervention. Because the systems humanity left behind were self-correcting, designed to reject regression like an immune system expels disease. In time, even those opportunists learned, not through exile or conquest, but because their people abandoned them. No one wanted to return to a past that had proven inferior. The Terran effect had changed expectations, permanently. Entire academies sprang up dedicated to understanding human psychology, not worship, study. Analysts pored over extinct Earth languages, decoding the roots of their philosophies. Films, literature, ancient memes, all examined as if they held cosmic truths. And in a way they did. They showed a species that thrived not despite its flaws, but through its constant effort to outgrow them. It was that ethic, more than any weapon or alliance, that reshaped the stars. Because once a species accepts that its flaws are not to be preserved, but to be overcome, it becomes unstoppable. And the lesson was now universal. Humanity didn't demand submission. They demanded evolution. Those who refused weren't conquered, they were simply forgotten. The final message didn't come as a threat or demand. It arrived encoded in a piece of music, an old Earth composition buried in a forgotten relay, triggered only when the last of the ancient human satellites ceased transmission. It wasn't grand. It wasn't even new. Just a quiet piano piece written centuries ago, played in a loop. No words, no explanation, just emotion. That was the last time anyone heard from Earth directly. From that moment on, humanity was history, alive in legacy, not presence. Their systems still functioned, their technologies still maintained stability across former conflict zones, but their people? Gone. No trace. No confirmed sightings. Only indirect consequences of their past involvement. Stabilized economies. Eradicated slave empires, artificial intelligence that enforced ethics rather than control. They had left behind a galaxy running smoother than it had in millennia, and with no clear power replacing them. What followed wasn't chaos. It was something far more disturbing. The galaxy held its breath, waiting, watching, expecting the humans to return and judge what had been done in their absence. But decades passed, and no Terran response ever came. Not for border disputes, not for escalating tensions, not even when a coalition of species tried to reclaim former human colonies. That operation collapsed within days, No military resistance, no sabotage. The infrastructure itself simply rejected them. Systems refused to boot. AI refused to cooperate. Terraforming halted mid-cycle, as if the planets knew they were unworthy. The elders had once warned of humanity as a threat. They were wrong. Humanity wasn't a threat. It was a threshold, a point past which the galaxy could no longer operate on its old assumptions, a civilizational singularity. Before humans, the galaxy revolved around domination. After them, it revolved around sustainability, not by decree, but by enforced reality. Those who ignored that law found themselves cast into irrelevance. Those who embraced it didn't rise to power. They rose to resilience. And yet, among all the changes, one truth became undeniable: the humans had prepared for this. Their disappearance wasn't an accident. It was an endgame, a calculated exit timed to perfection. They hadn't abandoned the galaxy. They had freed it from themselves and from the cycle of dependency. They had shown the way forward, then vanished, so no one could cling to their shadow. That, above all, was their most human act, to remove themselves so others could grow. In the decades that followed, systems stabilized. Warlords faded. Empires dissolved into networks of collaboration, not because peace was enforced, but because violence became economically obsolete. Data-sharing agreements replaced espionage. Cultural exchanges replaced conquest. Entire species restructured their societies around the idea that progress was no longer a competition, but a convergence. One where the most adaptable, the most self-correcting, the most transparent civilizations became the gravitational centers of influence. All of it traced back to Earth, and yet Earth remained silent. Telescopes scanned every wavelength. Probes were sent in secret, then in unison, but none ever returned. The Sol system had become a void, physically present yet unreachable. Even gravity behaved strangely there, as if space itself bent to prevent intrusion. Some claimed the humans had built a cloaking system beyond comprehension. Others believed they had transcended into another dimension. But the truth, like most human actions, was likely simpler. They had no intention of being found. They had given everything they could, and now the galaxy was on its own. Those who once scoffed at human adaptability began quoting their philosophers. Political leaders referenced Earth's failures as often as its triumphs, because that was the true Terran legacy. The admission of imperfection paired with the relentless demand to improve anyway. Humanity hadn't been perfect. They'd been determined. And in that determination, they'd forced the galaxy to evolve not by inspiration, but by necessity. Generations passed. Statues were never built. Temples were never raised. There were no pilgrimages to Earth, no commemorations of human holidays. The respect was quieter, harder, integrated. Humanity lived in the way power was distributed, in the way children were taught, in the way laws were written not to control people, but to protect them from those who tried. They lived in infrastructure that never failed, in AI that never lied, in space stations that never rusted. Their presence was systemic, not symbolic, and yet there remained one unanswerable question, one that echoed through universities, war councils, and quiet dinners. Alike, where did they go? Theories abounded. Some said they became one with their machines, ascending into pure data. Others believed they'd found a new galaxy, one untainted by old grudges, where they could start over. The Romantics thought they returned to Earth, sealed it off, and rebuilt paradise. The Cynics argued they simply ceased, tired of bearing the weight of a galaxy that only ever feared them. But none of those theories changed the outcome. Humanity was gone. Their lesson remained. A final archive surfaced a century later, buried deep within a derelict Terran vessel drifting outside the gravity well of a neutron star. It contained no new technology, No coordinates, just a single document titled After Us. It wasn't encrypted, it wasn't hidden, it simply waited for someone curious enough to find it. The document read, "We were never meant to stay. We were a mirror. A challenge, a warning, not to fear us, but to surpass us. If you are reading this, you have survived us. That means you've earned the next chapter. It won't be easy. It shouldn't be. But it's yours now. Make it better than we did. Make it last." That was it. No signature. No trace of who wrote. It. No indication of when. Just a quiet reminder that the galaxy's most feared, most misunderstood, most powerful civilization didn't want to be remembered as conquerors or legends. They wanted to be remembered as the last problem you had to solve on your own. And now, it was solved. Not with a war, not with surrender, but with transformation. Because the elders were right to fear the humans, but they were wrong about why. It wasn't the destruction humanity could unleash. It was the standard they left behind, and in the end, that was far harder to survive.